right, and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I'm your host, Courtenay, and I'm super passionate about moving and thinking. On this show, we are going to dive into all things health, fitness, personal development, lifestyle, and political sociocultural. I've always been fascinated by people, and I love learning from the experiences and stories of others. This has been a treat for me, and I hope this is enjoyable and useful for you. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or any way that I can make this a better experience for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Hello, welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I am here today with Yael Becker. She's a fellow podcaster. She has the Can Relate podcast. She was also a former belly dancer, and she recently moved just like I did. We were just talking about that. How are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Doing well. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey, how you went from, like, what made you start podcasting? How did you get into this space? How did you go from being a belly dancer to a political commentator?
Yeah, okay. So I know it's quite the journey, but it's funny because I've always done a ton of different things in my life. And I actually went and did a little bit of an analysis of how in the world all the things that I've done kind of connected, because I did singing. I was even in the wedding industry at some point. I was a business major, but I was going to work in the music industry. I mean, it's just all over the place. And then the belly dance thing, I owned my own belly dance fitness brand for a decade.
Wow.
And the connection between everything from the analysis I've done is that I am just a people person. I'm like an entertainer. So whatever is like a people facing role and talking, and teaching, whatever is like a people facing entertainment type of role is something that I'm generally into. But in terms of getting from the business closing to the podcasting world, it kind of started because I got a little bit political, probably I want to say around like 2015.
Okay.
I want to say probably when Trump started running. Before that, honestly, I was always like, I don't care. I have no idea, zero idea about politics. I don't care. I was always like, I'm so busy. I don't care. It's just, it was not even close to like something that I was interested in listening to, anything at all. But what caught my attention was the culture shift is what I felt.
Interesting.
Because all of a sudden it started affecting me, right? All of a sudden it wasn't just like politics. Yeah, all of a sudden it's like, wait, what is this? Right? So obviously I paid attention because I was still doing the same thing. Sure. I've always been the same way. I run my mouth. I don't really filter. It was, always kind of like my brand in a way. That's how people knew me. Like no matter what I did, I just kind of run my mouth and whatever. Even if it's before, teaching a belly dance class or whatnot, I'm very like, no filter. I'll make like off the cuff jokes or whatever. And I felt that the culture slowly, well, it felt like it was overnight, but I think it was slowly turning into, it was like the people getting offended. And then I think the big thing was just the Trump hysteria that caught my attention. That's what caught my attention. And I grew up in Israel until I was 12. So while the majority of my, life was in the US, culturally, Israelis are very they're very like loud and obnoxious and like kind of crass. And so you can see how you wouldn't really be offended by somebody like Trump, right?
Right.
So that's another thing that caught my attention. It was like, okay, why is everybody freaking out? We need to like take him. I mean, I found it hysterical for one. Okay, that's one thing. I was I was here for the entertainment. Again, I have no skin in the game. I'm not political. I'm just like cracking up at this ridiculousness that's happening. Meanwhile, everybody's having a meltdown and I'm watching one thing and I'm seeing the media say another thing. And I'm kind of like just trying to figure out what is going on here, right? So I think that was kind of like the beginning of how I got into politics. And it's, you can say I did quite a deep dive in, because when I get into something, I get into something. And so that, I'm one of those people. So I think that's how the journey began. And then kind of at the same time, I was deciding to close down my business. Long story short, it was due to like music royalties, and I just kind of hit a wall in several places, and I just decided this is not flowing, the way that I wanted to, and the vision that I had was not going to happen. And I came to like a closure with that. And as I had downtime, I'm very into like, self-reflection and meditation and just trying to figure out what to do next. And I just couldn't put my finger on it. Like for the first time in my life, I couldn't put my finger on what I'm going to do next, which is really strange for me, because everything I've done was always like, oh, I'm doing this for sure. I'm doing this for sure. It was like just on to the next. And, I have like a clear vision. And all of a sudden, for once, like my vision was just not clear about what I wanted to do.
Right.
And I was like, what is this? Like, what am I supposed to do? And, I took a lot of downtime. In that downtime, I also, I did more reading and research, like obsessively about,
Right.
politics and everything that was going down. And every time I meditated on it, I came back into like, you need to get into something political, something people facing. You got to speak the truth. You got to say what's on your mind. This is what you do. You've always said what's on your mind. You can't shy away from this now. You can't like cower. You can't. And every time I was like, no, I don't do this. I don't want to do this because people are going to hate me. Right. And when you're a people person, and just in a human being, right? We want to be liked, right? I mean, hello.
Right.
and right? It's not that difficult. And when you enter this space, I'm sure know, it's rough out there, right? This is not exactly the space you enter when you want all the love in the world.
No.
Not quite.
That's
and so yeah, but every time I sat with it and thought about it, I kind of came back to that same conclusion. So long story very long, that's how I kind of went from the belly dance world into the politics world. So I'm kind of like new, I guess, in a way, to the podcasting thing, although I've kind of always done this without the mic and without the culture being absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's pretty insane out there for sure. I would argue
out there.
Probably always been insane, but I think now it's much more transparent how much of a clown world it is. And it's getting progressively more and more so. So when you say you're newer to the podcast, but you were doing this before, so did you start like political commentary before you started the podcast, or you said 2015?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, no. I mean, I meant to the extent where like I always ran my mouth.
Right. Okay.
And I've always had very like public, positions, whether it was in my classes, I did workshops, I certified trainer, stuff like that. And, right. People stayed for hours before my class and after my class just to chat, you know, and I'm talking like groups of people. And there was never like, I never filtered myself or like held back or, it was just never a thing. So this is like not something new. It's just that I'm pressing record pretty much, right? That's really the difference. Yeah. And the difference is the reaction from the crowd. Some people just did not love this direction that I took, even though I stick by the fact that I am in the same direction that I've always been. It's everybody else that seems to have kind of shifted.
Fair enough. So when you started, so did you start back in 2015, or that's when you started opening up like your perspective on politics? And how long?
Yeah, that's a good question. So 2015 was just like observation. Like I still had my business and everything. Yeah. I didn't even speak out. It was very like Yeah, I think that's the part that was eating me up inside. It was all of a sudden I felt like I needed to kind of walk on eggshells to speak. That was the kind of shift in the culture that I
Right.
really did not like.
Yeah.
That's when I felt that difference, right? Especially near like friends or people that, you have your guard down. Like, who cares? You say whatever. All of
Right.
a sudden, it's this big, like, what can I say? What can I not say? Let's not get into this. Let's not get into that. And I was like, what's happening? I mean, it felt like we both know that this was really like a gradual thing that has occurred, but
Right.
it kind of felt like it was overnight almost, because
Sure.
probably because it amped up and probably because of like I think the Trump thing just like broke a lot of people's brains, like really, and then with the help of the media obviously. So seeing that, that's how that shift started. But I mean, I started my podcast only about like a year ago, I think, or something like that. And just
Yeah.
speaking out. Oh, yeah, so there you go.
Yeah.
And what's funny is like it really took me a while to kind of make the decision. Even when I started kind of posting on Instagram, I'm saying kind of because I was I was making generalizations. Like I wasn't being really, really true. Okay. I don't want to say that I was sugarcoating because that's too much, but I was still cutting corners in a way. Like I still had a little bit of a filter to what I
Right.
was saying.
I understand.
Where, yeah, where I decided at some point, I really don't know, maybe 6 months ago, maybe a little bit more, I guess.
Mhm.
That's when I decided, like, listen, you're either going to do this or you're not, right? Like for real. Like you're either going to really not have the filter, like at all. Like doesn't matter who you might be offending or what buttons you're pressing or who is about to like, curse you out.
Right.
You've got to do it, or you got to, and I think that's when things actually started taking off too, like on my Twitter and everything, because it's just what you have to do. It's like you either say the truth or you don't. You got to like commit to that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, I applaud you for doing that. What has been the biggest obstacle that you've come up against, or the biggest surprise that you've encountered as you started to share more of your views? And this is a twofold question. And how have your views shifted? So you said you came from not being political at all, right? So, and more finding
Oh
it
yeah.
amusing than anything. So yeah. So whichever one you want to answer
Yeah.
first.
Yeah. Okay. So the surprising part was that strangers tend to uh, kind of gravitate towards you more, and people who feel like they know you. And I should kind of say that, I guess, with like air quotes, because these were more like clients, not necessarily friends of mine, but people feel, I guess, like a certain comfort with you, especially, and you probably know this, especially if you share like a dance class or a fitness class, there's this like connection with people. And
Oh,
so maybe sometimes the connection feels stronger than, like, they feel a certain comfort level. And so unfortunately, uh I think a lot of people felt like they could just kind of attack me because they know me. Like it was like, yeah, it was a certain comfort level, which, yes, when we're dancing together, I want that comfort level. But let's keep it respectful if we're gonna play the game. And I don't know if you find that this happens to you, but we do a lot of reading and digging and research, and like we really care
mhm.
about, like, we don't just like, I don't just wake up and just like blah, like say stuff, right? Like
No,
I really dig in, right? And
totally.
I don't know if you get the same thing where people kind of assume that you are just like, you read a headline and you're like spewing it out, and so that's how they argue back with you.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's like, I think it's because that's what they do. So they assume that's what you do. And
Yep.
it's like, I don't think you're prepared for the debate that we're about to have, because I am obsessed. So I don't know if you're ready for this, but I did find that the people that feel comfortable kind of yelling at me, and I yelling like through the internet, are people who have taken my classes. Strangers, they'll just say like stupid like curses here and there, but that's about it. But it is interesting that it's the people who kind of feel like they can, you know, say that stuff to you, like that you're spreading misinformation and that you're dangerous and this and this and this and that. So that's been a very interesting part. And as far as shifting my politics, so I was never political, right? So I never really thought like, oh, I'm a Democrat, I'm a da, 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 da. You know, I never put myself into anything because I didn't care. But, you know, when Trump came around, you know, I thought that I was probably more on like the conservative side if I had to identify myself. Although honestly, I don't even think that Trump was really conservative. But then again, you know,
populist.
You know, that's yeah. So I kind of identified with that. But then I think as time went on, and especially through like 2020 and such, I found myself much more on the libertarian path and then towards like the anarchist path. I move very quickly. I move quite fast. I've always been like that.
I don't know that I'm fully there yet, but I've definitely had some,
you feel it. You feel it.
Just, say F them all. Government literally means to control. So yeah, I mean, that's literally what it means. So I'm like, yeah, maybe you can do away with them.
Yeah. And it's true. Once you kind of start, like digging into that level, I mean, so I went like, I think it is a natural pipeline, though, as much as it might sound funny. It is a natural progression because exactly what you said. It's like the whole realizing that the government is like your main issue, like the big central federal government, more than anything. And then you kind of end up going down that road. And I definitely think COVID drove a lot of people in that direction. So yeah, that's where I'm at. What'd you say?
No, it definitely exposed a lot, I think, for a lot of people. And I think that's one of the silver linings of it is that, I always say the Great Awakening will combat the Great Reset, right? So I think that COVID was pretty instrumental in awakening a lot of people, or at least beginning that journey. They say red pilling, but yeah, I think that was.
I so agree with you. Yeah, I'm so with you. I think we're experiencing it like slowly but surely, and I think some people might not realize it because we're in it. Mm-hmm. And when you're in something, it's so hard to kind of realize that, right? You have to kind of like step outside of yourself and like view everything from an external view, because some people. Yeah, you kind of have to, right? Because it's very hard to judge. We're in this mess, and we're like, we're not at the end. We're not at the beginning. Like, we're smack in it. So, a lot of times people don't realize, like, people are just starting to wake up. Like, this is, this is a journey.
It is. Unfortunately, things are ramping up so much that I worry about how much time we have for people to wake up. I'm like, come on, let's get there. Speed it up.
So I heard a few interesting things regarding that, by the way. So the first one was, and I don't remember who it was. It might have been Jordan Peterson on the Joe Rogan podcast, if I'm not mistaken.
I haven't finished listening to that one. It was 4 hours.
I'm almost. I'm almost positive that's it. I hope I'm right. Regarding the fact that, when an animal is like in its like dying stages where it's like almost completely dead, that's when it's like the most vicious. Yes. So in a way, this is kind of like a
Peterson. I've heard him say that on other. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So I think that's a super white pill right there. Like very positive kind of. They're ramping up because they're losing. They're freaking out. It's almost like, when you have it's almost like when somebody has like nothing to lose, they just like go balls to the wall.
Right. Well, there is also, and this is more of a biblical reference, but pride goeth before the fall. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So in a way it's positive, but it is hard to see that, because I do think that it gets harder before it gets better.
I do too. I worry about that. I worry about how much harder it's going to get. And I really worry about how prepared we are for that. So what, you said you moved here when you were 12. So is your whole family in the States now, or do you have family still in Israel?
Yeah, it's just my immediate family here. So yeah, my extended family is still in Israel. Yeah, it's a weird one. I mean, I'm personally not vaccinated. Some of my family is not over there. They definitely are. It's I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen over there. It is crazy. I mean, you basically can't do anything unless you're vaccinated, and I don't know what their end game is over there. I don't know if you know that they have like their government has a contract with Pfizer, and that's why it's like so like heavily vaccinated, and they are basically giving the data to Pfizer.
Yeah, and I actually know that this is kind of inside baseball, so I don't know how much specifics I'll go into just yet. I'd rather get clearance on it, but I'll just loosely say that I do know that there is word that there was a non, not GMO type of injection pharmaceutical that they were working on that was much more traditional. And that came to a screeching halt, and it was because of the big pharma companies that made a deal with the government. So that's kind of disappointing. That's not so good.
Super disappointing. I'm currently reading the real Anthony Fauci. Have you read that one yet?
Yes, I have. Yep. And your friend actually bought it for me on, and I listened on one of my drives, and I can't say too much if it was super new. I think it was great for people who are not. Yeah, I mean, some of us who've been like into all of this.
You're like, yes, I know.
Like, okay, but I'm glad. Yeah, exactly. But
I so agree with you.
Right? But I'm glad he laid it all out there. It was super comprehensive. It was super detailed. I think it was pretty irrefutable in many regards for a lot of people who are, still questioning some of the, alternative narratives. I think they presented a really great case with, tremendous data. So in that regard, I think it was a well-composed book, and I know a lot of the top doctors were editors on that book. So I'm really glad they did it. But yeah, what were you going to say about it?
It's so funny that I'm so agreeing with you. It's so funny because we're so in this that it's like a joke, honestly. And I'm so with you to the point where you're like, I know this information, but it was different to hear it almost in order, because we also kind of like lived it.
Yes.
Right. So it was nicely laid out, where there were times where I've heard books and, I finished them, but by the end I was kind of like, all right, like could have written this myself, not right at this point, like, my God, it's like sick. But this one is much, there were like a few details that also, we have so much happening that you kind of forget some of the details too. So I did think that the way that it was like, hearing it chronologically, like, it really makes you sick, like, even if you already know the information.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I think that one is great, at least so far.
Really, really, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think it was also so great to have it laid out, for the masses, who aren't steeped in it, and may not have known. And I certainly learned things. It's not like I knew everything in the book. Like, I don't want to say that, I will say that my one pet peeve, if I had to make a criticism, is that if he said democracy one more time, I was going to like throw something. Like, we are a constitutional republic. We are not a democracy.
Yes, I'm with you on that. I'm so with you on that. And especially, as I said, I'm down like the anarchist pipeline at this point. I'm like, all right. I'm like democracy is a false god at this point. So like, let's just, yeah, I'm like editing those words out of as I'm listening also on Audible.
The Greeks knew that, they feared democracy because they feared mob rule. And that is what we're seeing. So, yeah.
It's totally what we're seeing. Yeah, I'm so with you on that. So totally. But isn't it funny? Like, just the amount of information that we know at this point, it's like nearly comical. Like I always joke with like some of my friends that do the same thing, like in group chats or like whatever. Like every once in a while, I'll just be like, all right, like I know we have like a PhD on this already, but it's true. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. I'm like, I forgot what topic it was, but at some point I was like, all right, I'm handing you all PhDs, like unofficial titles
honorary PhD. Yeah, seriously. So what are some of the things that you've obviously done a lot of research and diving, and what are some of the things that have been really surprising to you that you've learned over the past few years?
Whew. All right. How are we going to get into that? All right. Let's see. If I go into maybe my most recent, like changes of politics, let's say.
Yeah.
So like I said, like the anarchist pipeline is definitely something that I read the Anarchist Handbook. I don't know if you saw that. It's not the Anarchist Cookbook. It's the Anarchist Handbook. It's organized by Michael Malice. Highly recommend. It's a compilation of essays. Really, really interesting. The best way I can describe it, it's like a deep meditation. It's like I feel like it's another layer where when somebody just suggests an idea and it just sounds totally crazy, right? So like most people, when you say like no government or whatever, they just think you're like a total lunatic, or what's gonna happen? It's gonna be chaos. It's gonna be like murder, and I don't know. And you start reading these essays, which by the way, some of them are quite like difficult. Like I had to read them several times, right? It's the best way I can describe it, it's like you hit like a deep like trance meditation where you're like, wow. Like it's quite enlightening when you shift that way of thinking. Right. So that's been one of my newest like changes, obviously due to what's happening. I think the second biggest is actually which is might be more controversial with if you have conservative viewers, is my stance on police. And that I want to say maybe started, I guess, the summer riots. Okay. I might be just the lack of response from police to the burnings, the BLM riots, I was in Long Island City at the time, like fireworks at like 2 a.m, and
where I was in Santa Monica, fireworks constantly. Yep.
I mean, talk about like waking up to a like if you have any sort of PTSD, like good luck with that, or pets, or I don't know, if you're just a normal person trying to get some sleep, loud noises like that at 2 a.m, not ideal. And nobody doing anything about it, just noticing like the double standards.
That's what I noticed. I actually didn't care so much about the fireworks, but the double standard was really driving me bonkers. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. That's what it comes down to at the end. The double standards. And so what I forgot who recommended it. Probably Michael Malice recommended reading Ordinary Men, actually Jordan Peterson as well. And that kind of talks about it goes into basically how normal people became like Nazi soldiers. And it's wild and it's fascinating and it's, I guess you could say, humbling because you kind of realize like they're normal people, right? Because it's easy to view these people as just like these unique monsters that are like not like you. And so I think that really shifted my perspective on um police. And when I say police, I mean specifically like state police.
Yes.
Right. So the idea is kind of like, I have no problem with like private security, right? Like private security, I can, it's no problem, because, but there becomes an issue, and we're clearly seeing it, especially with like, Capitol Police on January 6th, but just a bunch of different instances of what happens when the state has a monopoly on the police. It's scary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the police should not be working for the state. The police should be working for the people. So,
Correct.
When you talk about like people's theories on, like when they hear anarchism, that, there's going to be chaos. And I think really, I say like I've kind of teetered with that, like maybe that's a good idea, but the reality is that the big problem with government is centralized government. So it's the federal centralization, and now they want to go globalization, and that's really the biggest problem. Local government is there to protect and provide, and that is always what, at least in this country, but if you look throughout history, typically that's what government in the eyes of the people was to be. It was not supposed to be this massive overarching power over the people. It was supposed to protect when there was emergencies, crimes, the police, the local police department, the firefighters, the local roads, and education I feel actually very differently about, but that's a whole different topic. But those kinds of things that I think, those are where government does belong. And I think part of the problem in this country, I think, is that people have deferred way too much power to the central federal government, and they don't get, and this is on both sides, but I actually think that the left is really good at getting involved locally, and they work ground up. So what's interesting about the left is they see power as top down, but the way they achieve it is by infiltrating ground up. Whereas the right kind of does the opposite. Their ideology is everything should be grassroots, everything should be ground, the people. That's the philosophical ideology of the right. However, in practicality, most of them don't get involved or even interested until there's a federal election. And I mean, we see where that leads us. We don't really have a lot of, so I mean, arguably, Carol Quigley claims we haven't had federal elections for over 100 years, which is entirely possible. But even if we wanted to,
I'm kind of in that boat.
Yeah, I kind of am too. But even if we were to be benevolent and give the benefit of the doubt and say that we actually did, our Constitution was constructed such that, there are three branches. The executive branch isn't supposed to have that much power. He's not a monarchy. Like, it's not, it's not a king. So I think that's a huge problem. So when you talk about the sorry.
Yeah, that was a great observation. I never thought about the, that the left focuses on, the grassroots, even though they really, they always look at like the president for, like power. And then the right, wow, that's wild. I never thought about it that way.
So in terms of strategy of seizing the power, left goes through, they infiltrate. It's a long march.
They sure do. They sure do.
So, right? Yeah. And that is very strategic. But in terms of power, they're looking to centralize everything. It's just the way they go about it is from the bottom up, and then they work top down once they have power. Whereas the right believes in grassroots bottom up power, but they only get motivated when it's like a big federal election. Like, hello, people, a little late.
You know what else? You know what else is interesting that I've noticed? And I almost wonder if this is like a forever problem by nature. Okay, so the left is just so organized and they do so well, but it's also because they tend to have much more of a hive mind. And so then on the right, there's always so much more infighting because of the general like belief in individuality.
Yes,
and
that's always going to be,
it's almost like we can complain about the right not being as organized or as like together or whatnot, but it's almost like you can't. It's part of the problem. Part of the problem. It's, you know, you're going to have differing opinions and people who speak the truth, and they're not just going to, you know, obviously I'm making generalizations, but they're less likely to just kind of follow blindly. And, you know, in turn, you're going to be less organized and you're going to be less successful. So it's complicated.
No, it absolutely is. And I think that that's spot on. I think that's a huge part of the problem. It's that the right values individuality and they value critical thought and independence. But I think something needs to happen in terms of decentralization, because it's definitely getting progressively worse.
Oh yeah. Are you in the camp of national divorce? That's another camp that I'm in.
Oh,
I've been radicalized.
So tell me, national divorce. What does this mean?
Yeah. So
it's subject I might not know about.
Oh, yeah. So that kind of goes hand in hand with, you know, the federal government just being too big and how to potentially take it down. And there are pretty solid arguments, which, you know, also goes hand in hand with the anarchy idea, and that is to somehow split up the country, whether it's like one state, like state by state leaving, or, you know,
today. Oh my gosh. Okay, go on. I just proposed
really
like how this could, and I'll tell you it after.
Yes.
But interrupt. Continue.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. You know, people have different, you know, I've seen different like maps of things. You know, part of them, obviously, there are ones that are jokes too. Some of them are like legit. You know, they're like maps of the US, like, and it's like divided. But yeah, I mean, I not jokingly, I really am in that camp. And I mean, hell, Texas is big enough to be its own country anyway. So, and obviously, you know, and a big reason why this is a good idea, besides making the federal government, you know, non-existent pretty much, is you know, doing this as peaceful as possible, right? Like we want to, you know, we don't see eye to eye as a culture. Like we really have two different cultures in this country at this point. And it's not at the point where we can just unite, like in terms of principles. Like we can unite in terms of, you know, at least from my perspective, you know, I can do business, I can, you know, I can shop, I can whatever. But ideologically, you know, we're like black and white. I mean, you're talking about people who don't want freedom and people who want freedom. Yes. You know, people who want the government to tell them what to do, and other ones that want the exact opposite. I mean, we are like legitimately opposites. And so the most peaceful way to resolve this is to just, you know, amicably like divorce.
That's hilarious. So what I had proposed is that I think that one of the solutions could possibly be to create a bunch of, because it is so scattered, right? So when we first created our independence as a nation, you know, we were very small and we were all, you know, so it's much easier to organize and communicate. And now we are so atomized. And you know, what they're doing with all the censorship is creating further atomization. So what I had proposed was that there would be like sanctuary cities that create essentially their own, you know, organized kind of militias and, you know, basically sanctuary city. That's essentially what it would be. You know, they declare that these, you know, this code would be applicable here. They have their own constitutions, and those rights would be preserved in that area. And then if they need to congregate, if they're all aligned enough, then they would separate. And that was kind of, the theoretical model. So I guess it's
I mean, it makes sense. It really does. I mean, there's no reason for us to stay together in my eyes. What is the point? People are suffering like every 4 to 8 years with a presidency that they absolutely hate, and it really, really impacts their lives after a while.
So my thoughts on this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I will share a little bit and then you can tell me what you think about it. But I think that that's really like worst case scenario. I think a lot of this is being driven by a global force, a global elite force. And I think that the antidote to, they're trying, I always say they have a trinity that they worship, and it's the triple D's. It's the deceive, deception, division, and destruction. So they deceive, they distort, invert, to make things, those are their inversion tactics. Like Saul Alinsky wrote a whole book on it,
I posted about that today. That's so funny.
Oh, really?
The rules for radicals.
Yeah.
I posted. I saw this. So funny. Go ahead.
Hilarious. So then the division, divide and conquer, which is a big one, and I think it's the one that I'm speaking to right now. And then obviously destruction, destroy so they can rebuild. That's the Hegelian dialectic, crisis, solution, synthesis, right? So I think the divide and conquer, though, is a huge part of, they're trying to foist this civil war. And I ultimately think that people who really want to preserve America and ultimately preserve the free will of humanity, it's uniting is a much stronger antidote than separating. So I think that, we may be at a point where we have no choice, and that would be, the route to go if we have no other option. But I definitely don't think that that's the first line of, first line of defense. So, yeah. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on all of that?
So that used to be my position as well. That used to be a position. And I think because the amount of people, let's say, I think it's fair to say like it's about 50-50, pretty much. Like 50% of people, think we should have like federal power, like a strong federal government. They want more. They want more. I do. Yeah, I do. I mean, again, so I don't know how legitimate this election was, okay? But let's just assume that, okay, let's give it even 40%, right? Okay. I believe most people in the Democratic Party camp are for, they want the universal health care. They want the, and that goes with like the mask mandates. I mean, we've seen some polling that was super disturbing recently too, regarding like, vaccinated people like shouldn't belong in certain places, or that they should, there's always some stuff coming out every once in a while that is so bizarre. I mean, like that vaccinated people should be like censored, or like, we see these polls coming out every once in a while. Again, let's take things with a grain of salt, but I think there's enough of the United States that that does not like the values of the US anymore. And at the same time, yes, we can say, okay, but we're the ones like with the real values, let's say. But at the end of the day, I guess the way that I think about it is like, why do we need to keep fighting when there will always be approximately like, or almost half of this country that it will just be unhappy? Like every presidency, like I said, either 4 or 8 years, people are just, why are you suffering for like no reason when there could be like a peaceful solution where like every state or several states, if they're divided into countries, can just
sorry, go on. Yeah.
They can just uphold like whatever values they see fit. Like it's kind of like, and we can still, you can still trade, you can still whatever, but basically there just won't be this federal government that we're trying to, and I think decentralization in general, I think that's the theme of this awakening, because we're seeing that in everything too. It's the decentralization of tech, decentralization of media, everything to like everything we're doing. I think that's why they're freaking out. That's why they're losing power, because everything is in our hands way more than before. Like if you think about it, even like, I was going to say little things, but it's not little. Even, things like making movies, podcasting, everybody could be a journalist. Everybody could be a musician. Everybody, it's not in their power anymore. They can't. And I think they're freaking out because they're losing control. It used to be that like they pick you, you're the artist, they put $1 bajillion into you, they make you into like a little package deal, right? And that's how you sell. And now you're like, I don't want you. Like I don't want a record label. I'm just gonna do whatever the hell I want with like what? A $100 mic that, Michael Jackson used to record. It's $100. Right. So it's like they don't have this control anymore. And that's also why they're going for the censorship, because that's kind of what that's what they have left. How many more, they don't have many moves. But back to, the separation, I think that that's part of the theme, is that that's part of the decentralization. And I think that at first it's a little heartbreaking because we're like, but it's America, like we're the United States. And then when you start kind of realizing that it is a peaceful solution, and it doesn't mean that you're going to like fight with these other states. And I think that it's also like the title is going to be more different than the actual feeling. Like we're already like different states feel like different cultures here a lot of the times. It's just that we're all like slaves to this like federal government.
Wow, there's so much in there. So first I will say, I mean, we're 50 united sovereign states, right? So I'm all for states' rights. The states should not be subject to the federal government. I mean, that's a huge problem. That Jen Psaki came out and said, like, the states have no rights, and that is actually antithetical to our Constitution. That is flat out wrong. But I think the problem is that it's not really that we have red versus blue states. What we really have is blue cities versus red states. That's really the biggest problem. That's why I was saying, like sanctuary towns, cities, areas, really, because it really wouldn't even be cities, right? Because really the cities tend to be controlled. And this is where I go with the global problem. The problem with the global elites. You're familiar, I'm guessing, with like the Great Reset and all of that.
Unfortunately,
right? Yes. Yeah. So, but I mean, they've been working on these smart cities for a very long time.
Yeah.
And
so there's a reason. You're right. There's a reason why they're going for the cities for sure.
Yes, the track, stack, and pack them. That's what I call it. The smart cities, but they're the beta testing ground to roll everything else out. And so most of what's happening with the left is in bed with the global elites. So they're using the left and the establishment, right? Honestly, I think. I mean, I don't even think, a lot of the Republicans are, the part of the deep state, essentially. So they're
it's
not
a uniparty.
Yeah, exactly. They're not really doing us any favors. So, and in some ways
totally.
they're worse, because like a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? You think that you're electing somebody who is going to have your values and interests at heart, and they stab you in the back. So.
Totally. Yeah. I'm with you on that. Yeah, it's complicated for sure. I don't know. I don't know how this could happen. Let's say, so I'm curious about like how it would work. So let's say the sanctuary cities, would the federal government still like kind of, would it not have power over those areas? Is that what it is?
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Remember,
Okay.
kind of
Interesting.
like Chaz Chop, only it would be for
Yeah, yeah. Just less violence.
right, but it would be for good things, right? Be like
Yes,
a
exactly.
2A zone, first a 1A zone,
Yeah.
like zones
Yeah,
where
no, that's
the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, where these things are protected and cannot be, tampered with.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm so curious to hear if you read the Anarchist Handbook. I'll be really curious to hear what you have to say, because it doesn't even touch like the Constitution. It even says like the Constitution is like uh, you have rights like beyond that. Like you don't need that, which is very interesting. Considering, you know, they seem to really ignore our Constitution these days. So
So
it's
you could be arguing more of like a natural law type of theory.
Sure. More, yeah, more like the way that, let's say right now, me and you, like we're not doing this because the government is, telling us what to do. This is a private exchange. You've invited me like into your space, into your studio. I'm the guest. We go by your rules, type of thing. It's kind of like explained. Yeah, it's funny when you think about it, right? Because it's true. Like, or I always think this is so funny. I forgot who said this, but it was something like, if the government made like heroin legal, I'm not just gonna go do heroin. Like that's not what's deterring. Like when you realize that's not what's deterring most people from doing things, it's
Right.
very fascinating.
Yeah,
So
for sure. For sure. Well, I will definitely read it. That's, yeah, definitely intriguing to me. Um,
yeah.
I don't know that I don't know. I mean, I haven't read it, so I can't speak to it, but the idea that we don't need our Constitution, I think our Constitution is, one of the strongest arsenals that we have to, and, ammunition that we have to protect the free will of humanity. And I think it's why I have a beekeeper analogy, where I say like, how they say when all the bees go, the humans will cease to exist. Well, I feel like America is like the beekeeper, because when America falls, and so the world follows. And so it's incumbent upon America, the people of America, to preserve the free will of humanity. And I think you see that this is why people all over the world look to us. I mean, I had people, when Trump was running again, I had people all over the world like saying, do the right thing, we're counting on you.
Wow. Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, because whether they liked him or not was kind of irrelevant. They saw
It really was irrelevant.
it was
That's a
irrelevant.
great point.
Yeah, because it was really about freedom, and they recognized that we were in danger of having a color revolution. And they were like, if that happens to you, then we're gone. And so, it's kind of like looking to your older sibling, being like, you got to get me out of here, because like I'm
Oh yeah.
looking for you to save me. So yeah.
I do agree with that to a big extent. Although I've been pleasantly surprised by, some other countries kind of like unfortunately kicking our asses in the freedom department, which
Well,
I'm not saying that proudly.
in the resistance to the freedom. But it's kind of like, the analogy that you mentioned that Jordan Peterson had talked about, that when an animal is dying is when they fight the hardest, right?
Mhm.
It's because
Mhm.
I think part of it is that, Americans are very complacent. They don't realize that we're under a color revolution. They don't
Yeah.
realize that our freedoms really are being stripped, and that it's such a slippery slope. And they don't realize where this could lead. Whereas in other countries, they're at the end. They're like, We need to fight.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a solid point. We're very much like, oh, it's not going to happen to me. It's not going to happen here. Or like, yeah. That's so true. And if you dare like say that, you're like the crazy, right?
Totally. What are some things that you feel like, so when you start speaking up about some of these things that just made a lot of sense to you, what are some of the biggest resistance that really surprised you? Like what would you think is just such common sense? Because I think for me, a lot of times I'm so shocked that people don't see it, it's like that it's mind-boggling to me that I'm met with such vitriol because it seems so blatantly obvious to me,
Oh yeah. I'm with you. Unfortunately that's like almost, I feel like that's almost anything that we say, right? And to me it's like this is just common sense. I think at the very beginning, the biggest shock factor was like I said with Trump, I was like, this is like not that big of like I didn't think it was that big of a deal.
Right.
And people are kind of freaking out over his language. So that's like, way back in the day that I can think about. But I think I can't think of like anything specific that besides everything where I'm like, really? This is kind of, I should not be like the genius in the room. This is like what I always think about. Like it's mind-boggling sometimes, right? Like sure, there's some things where you're like, okay, I really did like a lot of reading into this. Fine, this is like some detailed stuff. But there's other stuff where you're like, really? Like it's it's just very interesting. But I did find I think one of the things that shocked me the most though in terms of response.
Yeah.
And this was one of the biggest realizations that I've had I guess this year. I don't know, it's a blur, right? This year, last year, something like that.
I know. They're blurring together.
That chunk of years. I think one of the biggest realizations was that the left does not have empathy. So I think that a lot of us are told that the left works with their emotions, like they're emotionally triggered and they make decisions based on emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And when I noticed the response that I got from a lot of left-leaning people and lefty friends,
yeah,
there was not only was there no emotion, but there was about zero empathy.
Interesting.
And that's when I noticed that they don't actually use their emotions, because using your emotions means you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And even if you disagree, you can kind of say, okay, I can kind of see that experience. Okay, I still disagree with it, but I can actually see where this anger is coming from, where this feeling is coming from. That's what a person that has empathy can do, right?
Yeah.
But they don't do that. So I think it's so wrong that we think that they work on emotions, because if you work with emotions, you don't cut off your family. You don't cut off your friends.
So,
You don't so maybe it's like a triggered anger, like a that type of emotion, but it's definitely not empathy.
well, it's interesting because they've done a lot of studies on personality and political leanings.
Yeah.
And the left tends to score very high on compassionate. However, it is the part of the compassionate that is kind of like, they score very high on agreeableness. But agreeableness bifurcates into politeness and compassionate. And interestingly enough, a lot of people on the right tend to be agreeable, but they're agreeable polite, not necessarily agreeable compassionate. And people who are agreeable compassionate, that sounds wonderful, right? That sounds like warm, fuzzy, and women typically tend to be more compassionate. Why? Because women bear children, and so they need to be compassionate towards their dependent, the infant who's dependent upon them, right? But what happens when that infant is being threatened? is that mama bear super compassionate to the intruder? No.
Right. Not exactly.
No. And what does that sound like? Does that sound like the social justice warriors who are protecting their little protected class? You know, they have so much compassion for this group, and they're going to do everything to protect them. They're like the mama bear of that group. So yes, they do, you know, we think of them as being emotional. I think when we say that as being, you know, kind of a stereotype generalization, you know, I mean, and it is, and there's reasons for stereotypes, you know, they've given us ample evidence, but I think it's also because a lot of times they make decisions based on those types of things, what resonates for them, as opposed to, and again, because they're agreeable, you know, so it's more of a hive mind. You had said that kind of mindset. So it's not so much that they're empathetic per se. They're not empathetic to anybody who is outside of their narrative, you know?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that was a big learning curve for me, because in my head, I always thought, okay, these are emotional people, so let me appeal to their emotions, and not in a manipulative way, but really in like a relatable kind of way, right? Because I feel like, you know, you change the way you speak. Like when I talk to like a guy, I'm going to speak a little bit differently than if I was to talk to like my girlfriends, right? Because you just process things differently, and, you know, it's just by nature. And I decided to be vulnerable with several friends and, you know, share with them how I feel regarding, you know, moving from New York City
That was
to
what I was gonna
Austin.
ask you about next. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect segue. So
in my mind.
I don't know if you remember, this video went viral. It was the police officers in Paris. Maybe it was France, but definitely Paris. They were checking the vaccine passports inside of a restaurant. This was, I guess, August of last year. And for some reason, I saw that video, and at this point, New York City was toying with the idea, or kind of warning, you know, that they were going to do the vaccine passports. And then I saw that it was same day that like the rumors happened. And the same day I saw that video go viral, with the police officers going around the cafe, checking the vax passports. And I was like, oh, no way. No way. I mean, it was an instant, like, you want to talk about the mama bear reaction? I was an instant, like, oh no. And so our lease was up, and we actually already had signed to renew for another year. We were looking at other states, but like, it was such a rush. And, you know, I looked around Florida, it didn't vibe with me. And I was like, I can't, you know, I have nowhere to go. Like, I need some time. And so we're like, fine, let's just renew for another year. And in that year, we're going to take our time, and we're going to find where to go, where to move. But the second I saw that video, I spoke to my boyfriend, and immediately we were both like, nah. And so that second, I kid you not, after seeing that video, I opened my email, I wrote to the to the you know, management of my building, and I said, listen, and I actually said, and it's funny because it sounds a little bit of like a Karen move, but I felt like they needed to know. The odds are that nobody cares, but I really felt so passionate about this, and I don't know how I phrased it, but basically it really triggered me, because I am the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. You better believe I'm never showing papers. You know, I probably would have, right? I probably would have felt that way no matter what. Yeah, I would have felt that way no matter what, I think, because it's just my personality, and I'm like freedom over anything. But this definitely, like, you know, this hits a different level. And and I wrote that to them, and they said, you know, I would like to cancel the lease renewal, or maybe I even asked, like, what if I said this, New York City is implementing this, what if I you know, want to cut the lease short? You know, I feel I don't want to, you know, I don't feel comfortable living in a city that has this type of mandate. Like, I legitimately said that. You know, not blaming the management, you know, I'm not that kind of person, but I felt like I really wanted to put that in there.
Yeah.
Because whenever I do stuff like that, which is not very often, it's in my head, I was kind of like, all right, what if other people are saying the same thing?
Right.
The odds are low, but it was worth writing it down. Anyway, they said, well, since it didn't kick in yet, it's not, you know, it's not September, you actually you can just, you know, scrap this. Like, you didn't even sign the renewal type of thing.
Wow.
So I was like, okay. And we had 2 weeks to pack and leave. And at that point, we hadn't even been to Texas yet. Like ever in my life.
Wow.
And yeah, and so we just had a list of states that were options. Obviously, you know, we narrowed it down by mandates, like, you know, freedom, and second was weather, because I was like, if I'm getting out of here, I don't want winter anymore. And that's kind of how we went through it. And I had a really good feeling about Austin just from knowing the vibe. You know, it's very happening here.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, I'm not going to do the city thing again, you know, because that's kind of why I'm leaving.
Yeah.
But, you know, outside of the city, you know, and we went Labor Day weekend. We had like 3.5 days. And I mean, I had like research, and we drove everywhere around Austin. We decided that it was a go. We started hitting up apartments. I mean, it was crazy. It was like a blur.
Right.
And and that was it. I was out. I mean, it was not even a question. For me, it was like a survival instinct. Like, this isn't happening.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So how is it there? I mean, I know Austin has actually there's a lot of influx from like California, and like it's actually gotten a lot more left than, you know, the rest of Texas. Yeah. So how do you feel about moving, like living there? You said you're outside the city. I did the same thing. I moved outside the city. First time in my adult life living outside the city, but yeah, it was definitely essential right now. So what do you notice that's different, and it sounds like you like it.
Oh, I like it a lot. So, yeah. So one of the things that I'm very like juju about this. I need to like vibe. You know, I need to vibe with a place, and yeah, there has to be like an energy that just kind of like makes sense for me. The climate made sense for me. The energy made sense for me, and the bottom line is, like, the laws made sense for me. Listen. Would I rather not be around people that are masking wherever they're going? Sure. But I'm not over here like trying to tell you what to do. And you also need to like pick and choose, right? So I didn't want to live in a city, but I also didn't want to be too far from a city, right? I wasn't going to just completely get like hours and hours away from a grocery store, because you know, maybe later in life that's what I'll want to do.
Sure.
Right? But you know, I'm still like, I still have I know what I like. I like to kind of have the suburb option, but if I want to drive like 25 minutes and go to like fancy schmancy restaurant, I'm going to do that. Or even like, there's something where when you're in a proximity to the city, you're just going to have different opportunities, right? Whether it's, seeing, for example, Jordan Peterson that we saw like, a few nights back. So you don't have that convenience when you're that far out. So I knew I wanted a certain energy and a certain vibe, but also kind of like live outside of it at the same time. And I think that Austin definitely offered that. I mean, first of all, we came here. Okay, so some people are masking up. I couldn't care less. At no point did anybody ask me to put a mask on. It was just a non-issue, especially coming from Manhattan, where it's like, forget it, you know? And you know what's interesting? And I don't know if you've noticed this, but in Manhattan, the people that were masked, they weren't just people that were masked. They were sad and dead in the eyes and fearful. And there was just this energy. We're here, even the masked people, I still have not had that experience. It's funny. We were like, I forgot what we were doing. We stopped for a second in the supermarket, and this older lady came up to us, and she was masked, and I don't know why my PTSD from New York City kicked in, and for some reason I thought this woman was gonna like yell at me or something for not wearing a mask. I don't know why. It's terrible. But I was like getting ready. I don't know. I mean, honestly, in New York City, that's why somebody comes up to you. It's awful, but that's just the truth.
One of the reasons
well, right. It's awful that that's your instinct, you know, to like get ready for that. But, you know, I forgot, she just had like a question, and she was just so nice. And okay, she was masked, but she was happy, and she came close, and, you know, okay, great. Like, that's all you need. It's just, it felt very normal, and that's okay. She's an older lady. She wants to mask. That's totally cool. I have no problem with it. She was a sweetheart. And that's like it. Like, I don't need like, oh, I need everybody to not be masked. Like, it's going to take a while. People are psychologically damaged. Okay.
Yes.
And, you know, if I can help them, I will. I don't know how. That, you know, the best thing I can do is I lead by example. You know, when everybody's masked, I'm not masked. There were several instances, especially we went to get our licenses, and, you know, at one point we were definitely the only not masked people in the room, and they didn't say anything. This is a government building. Nobody said a word. Nobody even like looked at you nasty. And you know what? It's just one step, but that is one way you can actually influence people. You don't know how many people walked in there because they think they have to wear a mask at a government building. And maybe they, you know, they see you and they're kind of like, huh, okay. And then, you know, so, but it's super different.
For sure. That's so interesting. Yeah, I had the same kind of, you know, I felt like I was going into battle every day in LA. You know, with the mask.
Awful.
It's so awful. So did you have kind of an immediate, like, you know, this is not the way things should be handled? Like, did you immediately not feel like the masks were a good idea? It sounds like you.
Oh, that's it.
That the jabs were just not going to happen. I mean, I don't know how Israel doesn't see it. To me, that's just tragic, because it is like Nazi.
It's tragic. It's really Nazi Germany. And honestly, it's kind of embarrassing if you know, not to be too harsh, but my God, I mean, you more than anyone should know, like, come on, that's crazy. What, just because it's your own government? Like, who cares? Actually, that makes more sense. That's usually, exactly. That's who usually turns on you. You don't need to look very far. You look at your next door neighbor, you know, that's who turns on you. Come on.
Nazi, right? Yeah.
It's wild, right? So I agree with you on that. But you know what's interesting? So in terms of the jabs, I was, you know, right away I dove into the science. So for me, I was super skeptical off the bat. But the interesting thing is, mask wise, okay, so from what I recall, when this first hit, you know, I didn't think too much of it. Although I do remember, like, right before like official lockdown, I remember we were kind of like, you know, and I recall going to a book club in Manhattan to meet friends. And I want to say maybe we didn't hug. Like, it was a little weird, but we kind of still showed up. This was like, I think like March 9th. And I think the lockdown was like March 15th.
Yeah.
So this was like right there. I do recall though that I said to my boyfriend, I was like, oh, maybe we'll just do an Uber instead of the subway. It was just like, things were a little weird, but we were still kind of like, I don't know. And then as it kind of progressed and there was the lockdown and they said 2 weeks, I will fully admit, I was like, all right, cool. 2 weeks. let's go. You know, like I'm good. Like I'm like a team player. And I'm like, I felt like it was war and we're in it together, right? Like, sure, like I'm a team player. Let's go. Like, so I felt very like American, I remember that. I do. I didn't, very, very innocently, I didn't think much of it, and it's probably because I don't have, I didn't have any background. It's not like I never looked into like previous pandemics or like anything like that. Like not at all. So it was almost like not really a big deal.
Right.
Like I was kind of like, whatever. I was very like apathetic about it. Like I said, it was like, go team. All right, let's go. Fine. 2 weeks. Fine. And then as things started, right after that, I was like, okay. But the reason why I think I believed in the mask and stuff a little bit more early on is because I think the fear was, I was in the center of the fear because we were in Long Island City. And do you remember the Elmhurst Hospital that they called the epicenter of the epicenter? We were like really close to that. So that felt like shit. No, did you live in an apartment or in a house?
I lived in an apartment. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were giving me a really hard time about not wearing my mask, like in the building. Now I'm hearing impaired, and the mask, I'm visually impaired. I'm blind in one eye. So the masks were creating Chalazion and the eye I see out of. When other people wore it, I couldn't hear them because I depend so much on lip reading. So it was not right from the beginning. I was like, these masks are not going to work for me. And I got to the point where like they kept calling me, at the fourth time I said, you can't make me wear it. It's a mandate. It's not a law. This is my home. And they said, we know, but we'd really like you to. And I said, well, I'd really like you to stop harassing me. So we're even. And, if we don't want a harassment suit, then maybe we'll just call
it. Sounds like one of us is breaking the law and it's not me.
Right.
It's like,
yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. I never got, I don't know, my building was kind of weird. It was like on and off with the mask mandate, but I was wearing masks in the beginning. I was like, I like I said, I was totally like a team player until it started like, okay. And again, I really do think a big part of it was like the fear. It was like, oh my God, you're in the epicenter of the epicenter. Everybody's dying. And everybody's like, oh my God. And in the subway, they were like bleaching the subway. I mean, there really was a different experience whether you were like in the thing, like in the center of it, and then like other places. Like I know, for example, like my parents were in the suburbs for part of it. And we did end up going, like, I guess it was summer of 2020, just to kind of like get out of the city. And I had like a huge reality check on that one. I was like, oh my God, this is like a different life. Because you have a car and you can just, oh my God. I mean, it's a different world. And that's when I really realized how different people's experiences probably were during this entire thing. And that's why some people are so scarred while others are like, oh, whatever. Like, because I saw the scarring that I had while I realized kind of early on, how much of like BS this was, although not to the extent that I know now, to be honest with you. Like, I didn't catch on as quickly as I probably should have, but yeah, fear played like a real role, they played that up. And if they kind of use that whole like do your like patriotic duty type thing against you, which is funny because now they're doing that, like different administration like doing the same thing, right? Like now they're doing it with the vax, like do your duty. And so
they're absolutely doing that, and they're trying to scare people, and they're hiding things from people, and it's not good. It's definitely not good. But it's funny when you talk about like different parts of the country, even, having a different experience. My favorite is when they asked the Amish like why it wasn't an issue for them, and they said, we don't have TV. We didn't get that program. I died.
It's so good, and it's so true though. Like,
yeah,
like honestly, it's like, you know, people really say like, hey, you want the virus to be over, shut off your TV.
exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Shut off the TV and, you know, switch off the program, because they're programming fear.
Oh yeah.
What do you see for the future? What do you think will be with our country, with the world? Yeah, with you?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I
Yeah, it
mean,
looks like it.
besides
I
the
like
fact
it.
that it's my besides the fact that it's my nature, I can see the pattern.
Mhm.
So again, I think the most important thing is, if people are feeling pessimistic or like black pilled about what's happening,
Yeah.
you need to realize that you are like inside the tornado right now. Right? And that's very hard to see clearly
Mhm.
when you're inside of what's happening, this revolution, this awakening, this whole thing. But this is not the beginning of this awakening and decentralization. It's just we're starting to hit one of the rougher parts of it. That's really what it is. But like I said before, it really started probably like with the internet, right? Like I said, you know, being able to like have your own website, being able to like produce your own movie, your own music. That's kind of how it started. But
Mhm.
maybe they just didn't see it like as a threat, or maybe they saw it as a little threat, but you know, and as we're getting more and more power and they're losing more and more, and you know, these are not talented people. They don't have many moves. They're not these like geniuses, right? That's a big white pill. We are way smarter than they are. They don't have many moves. They're kind of like dummies. Okay. um, and I do believe that we're winning and we're taking away their power, even though they're gonna try and try and try. But just like how their movement is global, so is ours. You know, it really is. Like our
That's
awakening,
great.
it's a global movement, you know. So it's
The
like
difference.
they
So I
yeah.
just want to, so sorry to interrupt, but there's
No,
something I
you're
want
good.
to address in that. Um, there's a huge difference, because theirs is global, but it's global elites, right? So people at the top who have this power, and their agenda is the New World Order, one world government. But
Yeah.
we definitely outnumber them. The freedom
Oh yeah.
fighters, that is a global movement as well. And we may not have the power, but we have the numbers, and there's power in numbers. So that is actually,
Exactly.
we really hadn't thought about it that way. And that's quite powerful.
And you heard like, you know, the recent video that came out from World Economic Forum, and they were like, yeah, we saw like a study that showed that like most people, you know, they just don't trust the elites. And it's like, well,
Well,
really?
yeah, thanks.
You- Did you really need a whole study on that? So the bottom line is I don't think they're winning. You know, I really don't. I think that the we're absolutely winning, and I think that they are just freaking out, and so they're trying to make us as miserable as possible, as quick as possible. But we are smarter, we're more creative than they are, and I see a very very bright future. And like I said, whenever people think, you know, doom and gloom, black pill, just remember you're probably focusing too much on the right now. You gotta like hop outside your body for a second and just look at the trends. Look at the trends, the positive trends, like much, you know, much further back, you know, and just see kind of what's happening, and also why they're freaking out and behaving the way that they are, you know, because they're losing.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, that's very optimistic. And I hope you're right. I do fear it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, though. So I think they
Yeah.
have a lot of plans they really want to implement. So I'm hoping that more people wake up, and, you know, but I think it's great that people are taking action. They're moving out of the cities. They're taking
Yeah.
control of the things that they can control. Um, and things like the trucker convoys, people just really putting their foot down and saying, no,
Yeah.
I'm not on board
Yeah.
with this. Civil disobedience is really the way it has been always. And I think
Always.
it is the way forward. So, yeah.
Totally. I'm with you.
Well, it's been awesome. I don't know if you have anything else that you would like to add, and definitely let us know where we can find you, and let us know if there's anything you want to work with.
Yeah, thank you. So my podcast is called Can Relate with Yael Becker. So you can find me basically everywhere at Yael Becker. On Twitter, I'm Yael_Becker. My website is yaelbecker.com. Yeah, that's it. So follow me anywhere. I try to answer as many comments as possible. I love chatting with people. I'm such a people person. So yeah, this was super fun.
Awesome. Well, we will do it again. We'll find some topic we want to deep dive on, and we'll hop in, go down the rabbit hole.
I love that. Yes, I love that.
Awesome. Thank you.